What's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. And inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the worst 10 brawlers in the game right now. So as always, when the update drops, I look at the best and the worst. So some of these haven't really changed, and some of them might actually be a bit of a surprise to you guys. So starting off with the 10th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Jackie. So I think without Jackie's hypercharge should probably be, I would say, the third worst brawler in the game. I think her hypercharge takes her up a little bit, but she's still pretty bad, right? She has literally no range, and it's very limited maps in the game for her right now. A lot of the really good maps have been taken out, like penalty kick, for example. But even when you just look strictly at Power League, there's probably literally a handful of maps I'd maybe play her on, maybe in a few Brawl maps, because again, she gets pinched out way too easily. But the hypercharge can be a game making moment, even if for like 2 minutes you can't get close to your opponents. All you need is one good hypercharge play, and then that could make or break it. But most of the time, she's just so predictable still, even with all the buffs and the hypercharge. Okay, so jumping into the 9th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with BB. So I'm sorry for all of you BB mains out there. She's really fun to play, but she's just not good in a competitive meta. She's very, very rarely seen whatsoever. There's only 2 maps in the game, really, which I'd consider her being a strong competitive pick, and that is probably like Pit Stop and Hot Potato. But still, in Hot Potato, there's just so many brawlers right now that counter her, and it's just even more hypercharged brawlers as well that just destroy her. You've got Lou, you've got Colette, you've got Maisie. There's just so many stun and cancellation brawlers. It makes it so hard for people to do anything. She hasn't received any type of buff really for a long time now. She received a small buff to her vitamin booster gadget, but I don't think that's enough to really push her outside of the bottom 10. For me, she just doesn't cut it whatsoever. Okay, so now jumping into the 8th worst brawler in the game right now. A lot of you guys might hate me for this, but it is Surge. So I think Surge is 100% in like the bottom 15. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh with him, but I just think he's really lost everything about him. He doesn't even counter tanks right now. I feel like unless you're using the gadget that allows you to get that extra level, you're basically useless. People can just pick on you the whole game. It can literally take the whole game to get your super, and even when you do, he just doesn't deal enough damage. He doesn't, of course, get 2 pieces of ammo back instantly, because normally you would use a power shield, right? So before, you can just brainlessly spam auto aim all the time, and you just can't do that anymore. He is an underrated pick, maybe in a few scenarios, maybe on like double swoosh, for example, in gem grab, and maybe a few Brawl maps, but still, there's just a lot better options. And of course, with all the unbreakable wall maps, I think that's actually hurt him, because throwers are definitely one of the better counters for him. They can just keep him in that first level. So for me, Surge has really fallen off, and it's unfortunate that he's starting to get towards the D or maybe even the F tier. Now jumping into the 7th worst brawler in the game right now, I've gone for Bo. So Bo, a lot of people will make the argument that he isn't as bad as I'm making out. But again, if you just look at the competitive data, you look at Power League, he's just never picked. And he's not even being picked by those bad randoms anymore. So that's just going to show if he's not good in the bad random kind of era, if he's not used in competitive, and what is he actually useful for? I don't really see any kind of use for him right now. He used to always kind of have a little bit of a place, you know, he used to counter a few certain brawlers in the meta, but still, he's not really useful. I think the only place I would make maybe a case for him is double swoosh. But still, there's a lot of better mids out there. There's probably like 5 or 6 other mids I'd rather go than a Bo. I think as well, his mines are too predictable. People just know how to activate him now. And I think his mines are only really good to break up the map. So for me, he's really predictable in a 1v1 as well. It's really easy to dodge his main attack. And there's just so many brawlers that outrange him and just destroy him. You know, brawlers like Nani and Piper have risen to the meta, and it's really hurt Bo. So for me, he just isn't usable right now. So jumping into the 6th worst brawler in the game right now, I've gone for Edar. So Edar will like forever be in the bottom 10. It doesn't really matter what kind of meta goes around, even if his hard counters are actually some of the worst brawlers in the game. Like Surge, for example, there's just still too many brawlers that can help pinch out Edar. The problem is, like, of course, Edar's good in 1v1 scenarios. He can shred a lot of different brawlers, but there's still so many gadgets, so many supers. And also, it's the fact that with Edar, if you miss maybe a few supers or don't get like a full supercharge back, and then you're stuck the whole game, especially if you run out of gadgets to get your next super. It takes forever, and even so, a lot of times in a 1v1, Edar might not even get the kill. It's not like a guaranteed kill every single time. There are a few like good matchups for him, and most of the time when he's using competitive, it's because their opponents have used like maybe a thrower and another squishy brawler. Then Edar can actually be usable. He's pretty decent on some heist maps, but other than that, he's just not really too great. So next up, as the 5th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Janet. So whenever I use Janet, she doesn't seem like terrible, But then again, every single time I use it, I just think I could just use a different brawler that just does her job just that bit better. She's just meh everywhere, and that's the main reason why she's so far on the list. And a lot of times as well, there's just so many high HP brawlers or just any type of aggressive play. If you miss a couple of shots, you're easily punished. You also got the fact that it takes so long to get your super, so you can't just brainlessly get your super really quick and always fly away to safety. And the fact that as well the gadget got nerfed not too long ago. It's just a lot of different things that have put Janet so far down in the meta. I'd say there's only maybe a few scenarios where you might use her. Again, like double swoosh is actually a good option for her because of her gadget. I think that's the only place I've seen her in competitive for a very long time. So for me, to be usable one map out of about 20 plus competitive maps, you have to be near the bottom of the meta. Okay, so now jumping into the 4th worst brawler in the game right now, we have Hank. So I know there's a lot of Hank mains out there because every single time I stream, everyone tells me to go Hank. I mean, obviously you guys are trolling. Hank can actually be underrated in some scenarios, but again, I think it's a very specific combination that you need to face off against. He's of course good against squishy brawlers and actually pretty good against throwers because they can one-tap them, especially when a damage gear activates. But still, if you miss maybe one shot or don't get the good connection that you want with your bubble, you're kind of screwed because it takes so long to charge that bubble back up. Of course, you can't regen whilst charging up your bubble. Time again, we talk about this issue, and I just think until that issue is solved, he's still going to be at the bottom. So for me, never pick Hank unless you're OG. Guys, so now jumping into the 3rd worst brawler in the game right now, I've gone for Chester. So it's going to be a lot of angry Chester mains, a lot of angry Edar mains and Surge mains. So that's probably like 90% of the video annoyed already. But trust me, Chester just doesn't really cut it right now. There's also been a little bit of a change to Chester. So if you didn't realize, when you actually die and get your super, well, when you have a super and you die, normally you would have the kind of Dynamite super. Now it's just random. I feel that's actually hurting because the Dynamite super, in my opinion, was actually one of the probably the best one, other than maybe the stun. Yeah, it's a little bit annoying for you to maybe want to get the Dynamite super and you're stuck with the really terrible lose super. So for me, I think Chester just needs some buffs to his super. I believe as well that you got the healing factors to both of his gadget and also his super wasn't actually buffed properly. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I just feel like his kit is so underwhelming. And even though the odd scenario you can actually pop off against tanks, there's just still a million other tank counters that are better than him. So I just don't really see a point for him. He's just not great. He doesn't really do anything right now. Okay, so now jumping into the 2nd worst brawler in the game right now, we have Doug. So it just feels like I'm on repeat for months now. It's the same brawlers right at the bottom with Hank, Doug, and Frank, of course. And, you know, Doug has just been terrible for the longest time. So even though they buffed him with his super, I feel like it's a nice change, but at the same time, you'd probably rather use the super on yourself. And I don't think that was really the problem with Doug. I think the problem, of course, with Doug, he has very limited range, and it's just so easy to pick on a Doug. Of course, he has no way to close down the opponents, and he has no way as well, you know, like all the other tanks. I know it might be a little bit broken to give him a tank trait, but they can get their super for free. But with Doug, it's like impossible to get your super if you're up against good players. So I don't know what they can do with Doug. He's just been terrible since this release. He quite clearly needs a big rework. Okay, so now jumping into the worst brawler in the game right now, of course it is Frank. So I kind of ruined it with what I said about Doug. But at the same time, you guys know every single time I make this ranking that it's not going to change whatsoever. It will never change. Frank will always be the worst brawler inside of the game. Mainly because there's just a bazillion things that counter his super. He's just normally a walk-in super machine. Everyone can just get a free super from Frank. There is the odd time where you can make a good play with Frank, especially with his super, but it does take quite a lot of skill to get the timing right because of how bad he is. And more often than not, there's just never a good matchup for him. So there are a few good Frank mains I see in Power League, but other than that, he's just terrible to use pretty much all of the time. So just waiting for that rework. Hopefully we get that pretty soon. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and also let me know whether I messed up any of the rankings, and I'll see you guys next time.